Okay guys, so we're going to go and do Uber Lilith. We're going to use an Elixir Advantage too, so we're going to go up. We don't have teleports, so we're going to have to evade back in when she knocks us back. And we're just going to go all in on her, and we should kill her before she gets a chance to jump in the air, as you can see. And then we're just going to wait for stage 2. And once she spawns, we're just going to go all in on her again. We'll expect to take her down just as quickly. And then after that, we're just going to have to play the mechanics and try not to get killed by the little ghosts, because we're going to kill her so fast, we're not going to stagger her at the point where it would stop her from spawning her ghosts. As you can see, absolutely melted. So now we're just going to stand around and wait. We've just got to watch out for the little ghosts, make sure we keep a barrier up, otherwise we can get one shot by her mechanics, which is not what we want, so we just need to watch out for those. It does actually look like we avoided the ghosts on this occasion, so if you manage to achieve this somehow, luckily, you pretty much get a free Uber Lilith. If you get the ghosts, you'll have to play those mechanics for a while, but this is going to be a free win now, actually. I don't normally get the free win here. Oh, we need to go over this side. I'll come back over here. I am quite surprised that we didn't get the ghosts there, because we staggered her too quickly. You normally have to stagger her when she's going to flap her wings. That's the point at which you would normally prevent her ghosts from spawning. But now we can just sit here, wait for her to come to the middle, and the second she's here, we just go all in, and she should just insta-die. And there you go, guys, on the charged lightning build with charged bolts, absolutely destroying Uber Lilith. Okay guys, so in Season 5 I played around with charge bolts and I came up with the Poison Bolt Sorcerer. So I gave that a go in the PTR for the upcoming Season 6, and it still has the same inherent problem where it just can't scale the endgame boss damage as I would like to, because sorcerers just cannot scale dot damage as much as I would like them to. So we took some of the new mechanics and new items available and tried a bog standard non-dot damage charge bolts build again, and I'm pleased to be able to bring you the charged lightning sorcerer. This is actually quite good. It has done a pit 91 as of right now. I very nearly did a pit 92. And it could absolutely go further with all the extra Paragon points and probably a bit of more fine-tuning. I put this together in about a day, given with the cheat mechanics from the PTR. But yeah, this is actually quite a good build for what has been a non-meta build up until now. So let's dive into the skill tree, guys. We'll try and get through this nice and quickly. So we've got 2 points in Firebolt, just bog standard. They can go anywhere here just to unlock the core skills. We come down to core skills, max out charge bolts. We take 1 point in enhanced charge bolts. And then you can take either destructive or greater charge bolts. It really is your preference. I've currently got destructive here because the extra damage reduction is very useful in the very high end pits. But greater charge bolts will help you on the boss damage and against enemies that have been stunned. So whatever takes your preference, really. We come down to defensive tree. We take 1 point in ice armor. We take 1 point in enhanced ice armor and mystical ice armor as usual, so that we get the extra damage against frozen enemies and we shield them. This is particularly good against bosses. If you are struggling to keep this up or you need more defense, you can absolutely take the points out of mystical ice armor and put it into shimmering ice armor. This will allow you some more defense instead of the offense. So that again is your preference. We then take 3 points in glass cannon, 1 point in elemental attunement, 1 point in energy focus, and 3 in damper layer, just for all the extra defensive mechanics here and the extra offensive glass cannon. I haven't, as of the moment, used teleports on this build, and I'll get into that later on, so we'll come back to that. We come down to the conjuration tree. Like in most sorcerer builds, we are using conjurations. So we've got 1 point in ice blades, 1 in enhanced ice blades, 1 in summoned ice blades, just for the cooldowns from ice blades. We've got 1 in lightning spear, 1 in enhanced lightning spear, and 1 in invoked lightning spear. We don't need any more points in these, and you could take the points out of invoked lightning spear if you feel you've got enough stun anyway, and put that somewhere else. But we've left that in there for now, because with the amount of critical chance we've got on this build, they are basically going to be stunning enemies for you all the time, which is extremely useful in this build. We've then also got 1 point in familiar, 1 in enhanced familiar, and 1 in summoned familiar, which I'll get back to shortly. And then we take maximum points in Conjuration Mastery. As you can see, I've only got 6 ranks here because my amulet is actually pretty trash. But if you've got more ranks here, this would obviously scale your damage enormously. It's one area where this build would be able to improve its damage over where I've got it to so far. We then come down to the mastery tree. We're maxing out ball lightning. We're taking 1 point in enhanced ball lightning as well, so the attack rate goes up. We're then also taking 1 point in flames, and then just so that we can get to devouring blaze and max those out as well, so we can get all the critical damage against burning enemies and controlled enemies. So that's very useful. We're then coming down to the ultimate skill tree. We're taking 1 point in unstable currents, 1 point in prime unstable currents. And then we're going to take 1 point in permafrost, just so we can get the 3 points in hoarfrost. Again, we're chilling them with the mystical armor. We're freezing them with our lucky freezes in the gear. It helps us against bosses when they're staggered. Very, very useful. We're then taking 1 point in coursing currents, because this build, where I've got it right now, isn't quite 100% crit chance, but you could you can use this just to get nearly every other hit to 100% crit chance on this build. So it made sense to come through this way, given we've got so much movement speed anyway. We then take 3 points in electrocution, so we've got the damage reduction because we're crit striking all the time with shock skills, and we're going to max out convulsions because we just want to be stunning enemies pretty much all of the time, and on this build you will be. And then we're going to take 3 points in elemental synergies. We have got quite a number of lightning skills in our hotbar, so we're going to benefit up to about 12% from this. You could potentially go to 15 with this as well if you wanted to change some skills around, but that's a nice multiplicative damage there. We're going to max out evocation because we want all of the cooldown reduction we can get through any other means possible. And we're going to use enlightenment on this build because it's actually pretty good for the attack speed and the damage. The mana regeneration isn't so key here, but the damage, the attack speed, and the boost to lightning damage from the fire and cold and non-physical damage, that all plays into here. And you're going to be stacking 100 stacks here very, very quickly on this build. So that is the skill tree. Okay, so let's go into the enchantments now. So I've gone through all of these, and I've ended up landing on ball lightning because you're going to be lucky hits. You're critical striking pretty much all the time, and your lucky hit on charge bolts is 50% or so when you're out in the wild. It's insanely high, and you've got so many of them. You're going to be spawning so many static ball lightnings when you've got groups of enemies up. These actually do play into the build quite well. They did boost the damage of the build quite immensely, actually, and especially since we're boosting core ranks across the build quite a bit as well. And then we're just taking the standard ice blades here because it just gives us more conjurations, more cooldown reduction. Absolutely brilliant. I haven't taken firebolts because we're going to get burning through the familiars. That's why I've taken familiars in the skills. The other thing is firebolt no longer procs your Tower of Shar's fire damage. This is very, very key. It took me a while to realise this, but they've changed it from doing direct damage with a certain type of damage to casting a skill with a certain type of damage. So you now need to cast a fire skill to get your fire ranks on your Tower of Shards, not hit with fire damage. So Firebolt no longer procs this. So we're going to use familiars and the fire familiar, which is why we're taking the top node, which cycles through them. So you can occasionally get a fire familiar, summon it, that procs your Tower of Shards, and they also attack and burn enemies. So you get your burn bonuses, defense, and such as well. It's not quite as consistent as Firebolt, but it is very important, that bit. I tried out a whole bunch of others. You could put teleport on here instead of damage, so you can get access to teleport if you wanted to take ranks there and have teleport without needing it on your hotbar. You could absolutely do this. That might be but that won't give you the unstoppable, so it won't help you in a crowd control situation. And on top of that, there's a few other usual options, but I landed on Ball Lightning because the damage boost really was pretty key here for pushing the high-end pits. It was quite noticeable. So now let's go into the Paragon. So if we go into the Paragon tree, we're coming into the entrance node. We're taking in here exploit because you can get 54 dexterity here. You can see I haven't capped that right now, but it gives you a nice amount of vulnerable damage, and we're just going to come straight through. We're going to come into the fundamental release tree board again, which is just very, very good. It probably will be used on nearly every build because it is applicable to every other build. I've just come through here as quickly as possible. Reinforced works really well here because you do not need to use many nodes to activate it. And on top of that, it also boosts your non-physical and vulnerable damage, which will be probably useful on just about every single sorcerer build, and it gives you damage reduction. And it gives you a multiplicative increase to your all damage as well, as you'll see later, goes pretty high. And it gives you bonus intelligence. So all in all, this is pretty strong here, and you would only really replace this with something if you just want full true damage, or if you specifically needed something else, because you can only get 5 glyphs. But this is pretty good here. And then we're just coming through bare minimum on all these clusters to get the damage reductions and the resistances and extra damage here, just because we haven't got maximum Paragon points yet, so we can't We would max all these clusters though in the final build. We then come through to Frigid Fate. We absolutely want to come in here so we can get Frigid Fate, so we can max this to 60% extra vulnerable damage. As you can see, I'm not quite there right now, but with extra Paragon points, I would get to the 60% bonus vulnerable damage here. That's very, very nice. You can also get access to Lucky Hit, which is useful in this build, access to more damage reduction to vulnerable, non-physical, extra max life, and so on and so on. So this is all extremely good. And the glyph we've gone for in here is Enchanter, because this just gives you an enormous amount of extra flat damage, multiplicative flat damage, and it gives the additional bonus unfortunately isn't that key here, but the amount of extra flat damage it gives is pretty insane, and you can get 100 intelligence here, so this is really, really strong on a lot of builds. So this will probably be used on a lot of builds in an intelligence based board area for glyph. We then come up to Burning Instinct, sorry. The reason for this being, we want to get destruction here, and this board offers a very, very large amount of extra dexterity here. You can get up to 59, I believe. I think that's the cap here. So that's giving us a really, really large amount of extra crit damage, and the bonus crit damage is also very nice as well. We can also get the damage reduction from burning. That's very useful. Extra damage to burning, useful. The damage reduction from elites particularly is useful here, which is another reason to come to this board. And then you can come up here and get the current burning damage node if you feel that's necessary. Although this doesn't really play into the build much, so we could actually remove this. The only thing is here, you could remove this node and not use this one here if you felt like it. This isn't going to be playing much into the build. But you can use it there to get an extra bit of oomph out your burning damage if you want. Then we come through the final board I've gone through here, and I played with a whole bunch of different ones. But the reason I came into this board is because Elemental Summoner has a glyph area that has an enormous amount of intelligence in it, over 100. It also has attack speed in it with conjuration damage, so we've got a lot of conjurations going on like lightning spears, and that plays into the damage quite a bit. But the attack speed here, so we can get our attack speed up through the Paragon board. Extra mana isn't really that useful, but the max life's very strong here. Impairment reduction, damage taken over time reduction is pretty useful. The extra resistances here could be useful in the armor if you wanted to play around with different items, non-physical and conjuration, but particularly it's for the intelligence. And the reason for that being, we are using the Eliminator glyph here for the extra elite damage. This is very significant on the elite damage. I didn't think it would be, because I thought it was multiplying the elite damage in the additives damage set, but it does seem to boost your elite damage pretty significantly. And on top of that, you can get it boosts all of your normal nodes by 624%. Now, why that's important is because you can get so much intelligence here, it will scale each one of these normal intelligence nodes to 36, from 5 to 36, and you can get over 100 here, so you can get well over 600 intelligence from this glyph here as well. That in itself, if you go to your character sheet, will give you an enormous amount of skill damage boost, and that will boost the damage across the board on your ball lightnings, your charged lightnings, your lightning spears. Everything will just scale with that as long as it's skill damage. So that will give us a huge boost of damage as well. It's more than a glyph node. Now, let's go into the gear, guys. We're going to fly through this. So we're using the Air of Perdition again. I tried the Andariel's, which is what I used last season. I tried the Harlequin's Crest, which is also quite good here. But the Air of Perdition really is just excellent for this build because it helps you solve crit chance, lucky hit chance is useful, movement speed is useful, and the +3 to core skills plays into your ball lightning, it plays into your charged bolts. It's extremely strong here, and 60% multiplicative damage when it kicks in is very, very good. And a bit of extra additive damage if you happen to be fighting against demons. At the moment, there are no angels, but there probably will be in the expansion, right? So we're using the Tyrell's chest piece here, but this could be replaced by any legendary chest piece with any damage reduction aspects on it, and just take resistance to all elements and take extra life and a bit of intelligence on it. You basically just want to mimic what this is giving you as best as possible, and you would just have to make up the difference elsewhere until you can find one of these. Getting a greater affix damage reduction Tyrells in Season 6 will, in theory, be a lot easier than it has been in Season 5, because they always drop with one greater affix. So this is definitely attainable. Masterwork materials are farmable in Nightmare Dungeons, so they will also be attainable enough to be able to get this. So this will be an attainable item, but until then you can use a legendary item or any other sensible chest piece. Gloves, I've got intelligence, triple work and attack speed. I've currently got 4 in charge bolts, but possibly the ranks of core skills would be better because that would scale your ball lightning as well. And then we've got chance to stun and critical strike damage. Now the critical strike damage is particularly important here. The chance to stun could be chance to freeze. That might actually be better because you've got so much chance to stun anyway. Chance to freeze kicks in your Hoarfrost. And yeah, the reason we've gone for triple masterwork on the attack speed is because we don't have the attack speed from the Endarials and Helm. So we're just trying to make up as much to 100% attack speed as we can elsewhere on our gear. And the aspect we're using is the piercing static for the charge bolts, because without that, this build doesn't really function properly. You need to be able to have your charge bolts pierce the enemies so they can go through and hit multiple enemies and also come back through bosses and such. I kind of wish this didn't reduce your damage so much, but it does, so it's what we've got right now. Until they may possibly buff this in the future because it seems a bit underwhelming right now, but for now this is imperative for the build. Moving on to the pants, we've got intelligence, max life and armor. If you've got a greater affix of armor here, you wouldn't need to masterwork it twice to get to your 1000 cap in Torment 4. Intelligence and max life just makes sense. You could absolutely put resistance to all elements on here in somewhere if you didn't have your Tyrells and you needed more resistances. I've used total armor percent because you will probably need that to be able to get to your 1000 armor here until you've got all 300 Paragon points. Once you've got all 300 Paragon points, it might be possible to get to 1000 without that 21% bonus armor, but I feel like that's probably going to end up being needed on this piece of armor. And the Lucky Freeze, as I said, is very useful because it plays into Hoarfrost. We've taken Orange Herald here because this allows us to keep unstable currents up pretty much all the time in combat. We are lucky hitting 50% plus all of... we're lucky hitting 35% to 50% of the time all the time on this build, and it's just going to mean that your ultimate skill is just going to fly down in cooldown. It should be off cooldown way before it runs out, so that's very useful here. On the boots, we've got intelligence, max life and movement speed. This is pretty self-explanatory here. I've masterworks into maximum life here, but to be honest, I just put the best things I could get in here. So you've got the double movement speeds to allow you higher movement speeds. We're not using teleport on this build right now, so I haven't got teleport cooldown. If you decided to play teleports on this build somewhere, you could put teleport cooldown here. We've also got chance to freeze enemies. This is very useful here. Again, playing into Hoarfrost. We've got the +3 maximum evade charges implicit because we want to be able to evade around. I find this just generally more useful than the other two when you're in really, really tight combat situations. And then we're taking concussive strikes because that just gives us more damage. We're going to be lucky hitting a lot, so we're going to be dazing them a lot, and this helps you stagger bosses quickly and means when you stagger the boss, you do more damage to them. The staff is pretty much has to be used. This is a staff of Lamesson. This is the best one I was able to find. I was lucky enough to get the triple masterwork into a GA charge bolts, so you can get +16 ranks here. A better one of these would have over 100% chance for charge bolts. It would have a GA of resource cost reduction at like 87+% or whatever it goes to. So you're not ever going to... I don't even worry about mana at this point without any mana per second. So as long as you've got a good roll on it, at Masterwork 12, this thing will solve your mana problems. And you can get a huge amount of intelligence on this if you get a greater affix on it. On top of that, you want as higher aspects as possible on this. It's extremely key that you get somewhere between 60 and 80%, but preferably nearer to the 80%, because this build functions entirely by the charge bolts lasting 4 times as long, so that they can then float off and then pierce the enemies and not just disappear very quickly. On top of that, they attract enemies, and if they proc that at the start, they carry on doing it even if the enemy they're attracted to dies. So they become a little bit of a swarm, a bit like a swarm of wasps. I do kind of wish this would scale up to 100%. Maybe they'll buff this sometime, but for now this is what we've got. And we've stuck critical strike damage gems in here because we're aiming to scale this critical strike as much as possible. And the reason for that being is on the amulet we are using the splintering energy aspects. It's the first time I've used it, and hell god is it strong. I am not surprised this is used on a lot of sorcerers builds right now. This may possibly get tweaked, so before the next season we will have to see. But yes, because it's not got a cap on how much the critical strike bonus can scale the damage here, this is one of the reasons this does so much damage. So we have put crit damage everywhere we can on this build with these items. And on top of that, this is not a very good amulet, to be honest. It's not ancestral, but we've got the cooldown and we've got a conjuration mastery. You would ideally have greater affix, conjuration mastery, cooldown reduction, attack speed, probably 3 stats, so you can get nearest 100% attack speed. I tried a Winter Glass, didn't really play into this build so well, and you kind of need the aspect slot, and you really need to have this splintering energy on the best slot possible, which is the amulet, because you cannot play this build without the Staff of Lamesson, so the two-handed weapon is off the cards. And we've got Lightning Spear cooldown here. If we had the second one, we would absolutely take something like crit damage on here as well, so you could gain extra damage there too. And on top of that, we're using a Ring of Starless Skies. I have managed to get a 2GA here. Getting a 2GA Greater Affix Mythic in Season 6 will be attainable. You get 1 by default, so 2 will become the new 1 Greater Affix from the current season. So they're not going to drop like handy, but they will be attainable if you're lucky. But you will just want a Greater Affix attack speed one if possible. If you had a non-Greater... These will always drop with greater affixes, so you can just keep dropping them until eventually you get an attack speed one, and you just want to triple masterwork that because the attack speed here is key. We've got so much crit chance from the helm anyway. Losing a little bit of crit chance here will not be the end of the world. It just means you get a bit more crit damage going on. Yeah, and the rest of the item here is pretty self-explanatory. The core skills plays again into charge bolts and into your ball lightning, so that's very nice. Lucky hit, excellent, and this just helps your resource cost reduction and gives you a 50x multiplier. You could potentially replace this with a legendary if you feel the attack speed isn't needed over getting the extra crit damage, lightning spear cooldown, and other aspects, and so on and so on. Maybe that would end up being better. I haven't tried it. I haven't had a good enough ring, but you would really need a very, very good triple damage ring. Crit strike, crit damage, attack speeds, with everything excellent to be better, I reckon, and it would have to be ancestral. And then on top of that, we're using the Tower of Shards. With the use of the Familiar, we are proccing all 3 casts of the damage here, so you can get up to 75x multiplier. That is just huge, very hard to beat. Non-physical damage plays well into this build. The cooldown reduction here is very useful in this build because we don't have that many ways to get cooldown reduction. Lucky hits obviously useful here. And then we're using skulls in all the jewelry to get our armor up to max. We're using, as we said already, crit damage gems in the weapon. We're using topazes in the pants so that we can get some extra intelligence. That gives us more all-res and more damage. And then for our runes, we are using Yo and Ohm so that every time we cast a skill, with a cooldown, we get 50 offering, and that will eventually evoke the enhanced war cry because it's just exceptional. And then we are using the duo that's very commonly known right now. Cast a non-channeled skill, core skill, because you're casting charged bolts so often. And then we are using Yom for the evoke the Druid's Petrify, because that with the crit damage multiplier on this build is exceptional. It just boosts the damage immensely. I tried all sorts of different variations. The Necromancer Decrepify is very good, as I've got here. This one can play very well alongside Warcry, and it's very good for clearing the dungeons. I could probably do a Pit 95 clearance, except I wouldn't be able to kill the boss. This does not help on the boss when it comes to damage. It only helps with reducing their damage. But when it comes to clearing the pits, it's exceptional because you can kill. You pretty much going to execute enemies the second they're below the threshold because you got so much lucky hit on this build. Yeah, I also tried Spirit Board's Concussive Stomp. That's not bad, but again doesn't really help on the boss that much. And the Vortex as well, very good for clearing, but again doesn't really help on the boss. So at the moment, Yom is the best with the Petrify because it helps stun the boss and it makes you do a lot more crit damage against them. And just for stats, we go over 100,000 attack power, maxed armor, 2,800 life. This would go up with more Paragon points, 2,200 intelligence. Pretty much enough of these stats to activate most of the nodes in the board. We'll get the rest once you get more Paragon points. Max resistances with the Tie Rouse, 2,500 crit damage, 93% crit chance. This would only go up now if you get more dexterity, which can be done with the elite glyph. Attack speed here at 69. If you use an advantage elixir 2, you'll be up to 84. And then along with your enlightenment key passive, you get an extra 20%. So you will be quite often at 100% attack speed anyway. But you can also get extra attack speed on your amulet and such as well. So you'll be able to get this. Be able to get this a bit closer all of the time. We've also got 1,100 vulnerable damage, 2,500 all damage, which this goes up to about 28,000 when you've got everything going on. I checked; it's pretty mental. And all of these will go up to about 1,000 once enlightenment kicks in as well. And yeah, we've got a few extra additives in there. Damage reductions are very high across the board against most things. And we've got 61.5% lucky hit bonus, but the elixir puts you up to just under 80. Movement speed is almost capped, cooldown reduction at 30.2. So all in all, you've got a pretty well-rounded build here. Okay guys, so we're going to go and do a Tormented Duriel. This build can absolutely do all 6 Tormented bosses, but we're just going to demonstrate a Duriel here. We're going to use an Elixir Advantage 2 here, and we're going to go ahead and summon him up. You can only summon him up now, and we're just going to stand here and get going. The damage will take a moment to ramp up, but once it gets going, it will start to stagger him immensely. And once he's staggered, he should just absolutely melt. So we're just going to spam all our skills, get going, and as you can see, I mean, he may not even get staggered dead. Okay guys, so we're going to do a hit 90 here just to demonstrate that we can do 90 plus. We're going to use an Elixir Advantage 2 and we're going to get going. So we'll just focus on this resistance mob here. The stuff should go down pretty fast, so you should find that you'll be crowd controlling things a lot. You can see here the ball lightnings are absolutely everywhere because we're just lucky hitting all the time. And all of that collectively with the charge bolts and the lightning spear splintering energy and the few chain lightnings we've got just combined to this absolute one combined mass lightning sorcerer, which is great to see, very visually pleasing, with plenty of room to improve the build as well across gear, Paragon, and potentially build combinations as well. This is something I threw together within about a day's worth of playing around with stuff, so this is a bit rough around the edges, but we can do 90 plus pits with it. So we're just going to moonwalk lightning cast here through the enemies. This is generally the way I play, just because you don't need to be standing still the majority of the time. You can just keep moving. Use your evade every now and then. Just get rid of that resistance mob here. Once he goes down to the AoE, everything else should just go down pretty fast. Just make sure we keep unstable currents up, because that just elevates our damage a very large amount. As you'll see here, there's elites. If everything's grouped up here, you will absolutely nuke the enemies once everything starts kicking in. There's a hell of a lot of AoE explosion lightning damage on this build. So having things grouped up is definitely ideal. You don't want to stand too much in these lightning beams and the dot damage, because otherwise they will take you out. The damage does scale pretty heavily in pit 90 plus, so unless you are very, very quickly killing stuff, you do need to be slightly more careful in what you're doing. Because we don't have the slots right now for teleport, we don't have that to prevent us from getting crowd controlled and stuck, so you do have to be careful with that as well. You could potentially put that on somewhere or use it in one of your enchantments for evade, but then you would lose your ball lightning capability, and I did find the damage improvement from that to be pretty significant. But by all means, try around with what you can once the season drops. Okay guys, we're going to go up to the boss now. Let's see which boss we've got here. We've got Resurrected Malice, okay. So we're just going to go all in here. Try and deal with his, just try and do as much damage as we can, as quickly as we can during the stagger periods. And then we're going to have to play the shadow mechanics for a bit, I think. Hopefully we don't get awful ones. This is not the best one, it's a bit awkward, but you can avoid it. I didn't manage to avoid it there, mind you. We don't want to take too many of those, otherwise that'll become a problem. Staggered again, we're just going all in. Annoyingly, there's something there dragging the bolts away, so I didn't do as much damage as I wanted to. Okay, so we're pretty close now. We really don't want to get any more stacks of debuffs on us while we're dealing with him. And there you go. Hit 90 complete on the charged lightning bolt, charged bolts build. And I have done a 91, very nearly did a 92 on this build. It's a bit of a grind, but there is room for improvement.